Hello and welcome to this week's devlog for my procedurally generated voxel RPG game. The other day I was playing through the game while in a compromised position when I had a thought. What are all those weird lumps in the game world? Well, turns out they're villages. Can't you tell from the model? Now the idea is that the player will be able to walk up to a location, discover it, and then have the option to visit it. With this, they'll be able to go into the map, have a walk around, talk to some people, find items, and maybe even find love. But the idea is that the player will be able to return to the procedural world at any point. This mechanic sort of gives the impression of a large, explorable open world, while also allowing me to cut some very sensible corners. Like not having to deal with the technical issues of streaming a large town into memory. But that's not to say that visiting places isn't going to be a difficult challenge anyway, so what I'd like to do is start with a few simpler things and gradually build up to it. So, if you happen to be one of my German viewers, then today should be a big day for you, as this week we're going to add dungeons. I do plan to use this as a stepping stone before I add towns and locations, as I did plan to add dungeons to the game anyway. They, like the Overworld, will be procedurally generated and will give the opportunity for short bursts of gameplay with the optional rewards at the end for the daring player. So, should be fun. Can't imagine that I'm going to run into any issues with it or anything like that.
No, God!
Okay, well, here's a problem. This game was really quite different until roughly of April this year. It went from being a sort of idle clicker game to a fully explorable and interactive game. As a result of this, I have been moving as quickly as I can to figure stuff out. The problem I really had was that I didn't actually know how the gameplay was going to work after the change in style of the game. So following on from that, I decided I would prioritize figuring out the gameplay above everything else. That did mean, however, that the code quality took a noticeable dive, but I was okay with that. Direct access all over the place? Huh. I'm just following orders, mate. But this of course did make the code really rigid, just like my Theresa May. Now I had originally planned to batch all of this work together into a video called something like Fixing 6 months of spaghetti code in a week. But I've reached the point where this code rework can't go on for any longer because it's actively hindering me. Firstly, what I actually hope to achieve with the dungeons is fairly simple at the moment. I just want to have a bunch of rooms with some enemies in them and perhaps some loot. Maybe at a later date. A long time ago now, pre-pandemic, I wrote this thing while still at university to test some of the functionality of my engine. It's quite a simple dungeon generator and fits into only a few lines of code. The way it works is generate a bunch of rectangles to represent the rooms and then write that into an array. From that point, you can just do a simple flood fill to figure out which of the rooms are actually stuck together, just like this. So that can be quite useful if you want to get rid of some of the rooms that are too small for your liking. Now there are more complex things I could do, like generate corridors between the rooms, but for now, let's just get this boy into the game to demonstrate how it works. Basically right now, everything for the game is just jammed into this exploration logic file. Originally I had the exploration screen class and then exploration logic, both of which are brought over from the old game. The logic was responsible for determining when, say, an encounter or an item was found, whereas the screen was just responsible for displaying that in some way. When I came to redesign the game, screen didn't end up having too much to do, but the exploration logic class just ended up completely ballooning, as it ended up having responsibility for basically drawing the world, enemies, and pretty much all of the gameplay. This was a massive burden, as in the space of about a month it became a complete rat's nest of hedonism and regrettable decisions. Importantly, exploration logic owned the life cycle of the world, meaning I couldn't have multiple worlds or move between them. So really that's something I need to change. The first step of the plan for dungeons: separate as much of this code into its own class as possible. I want to be able to share a lot of the logic for things like player movement, for example, so having it in its own centralized class is a must. I would have a world class which contains all the base logic and then inherit that with any other world types I needed. I could do whatever logic I needed in the inherited classes, like generating worlds or dungeons. Importantly, I could switch between the active world at any time, allowing me to do that transition between the world and the visited place. The exploration logic class, which will probably get renamed at some point, will just manage which world is active at a given time and can also queue inactive worlds so that the player can return to them at a later date. With all that decided, the problem really was how do I untangle this mess? Well, over a period of a few days. I started by creating this world object and moving as much of the code over as I possibly could. I did have to be sure not to break anything, so it was slow work. For the rest though, it was a process of move some code over, check what broke, fix it, and then rinse and repeat for about 2 days. Gradually things were springing to life though. Here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looked like after. Now, with things on the up, it's time to dungeon. I rejigged the procedural code to create a dungeon gen object and pretty much just copy and pasted the code from my demo into it. I created a new world object to contain my dungeon logic and rejoiced at the fact I could just swap out the world object in the exploration logic and have the whole thing not crash on me. Actually generating the dungeon went well enough, but what's that thing up there? With these different world types, I now needed to support different map types as well, which meant another load of code that needed to be abstracted off. This was another day of shifting code around, but I now had a map viewer class, which all of the different viewers inherited from. So, was everything now in place for me to be able to generate a dungeon and see it in the viewer? Oh, boys, we did it, sort of. It may be a dungeon, but do you know what it's not? It's not in the world. You see, now began the fun stuff, visualization. I needed to get the map in some visible format, and I knew just how to do that, the voxelizer. I set about populating the data in an array and passing it over, and... Okay, well, that was a stupid idea. Do you see these shadows? I don't particularly know why they're there, but it's definitely a bug to do with the ambient occlusion. Anyway, I ultimately decided that the voxelizer probably wasn't the best approach for this from an efficiency perspective, so I instead decided to make a few meshes and tile them together. The idea was that they could be batched up and I could avoid a lot of the duplication that I would ultimately get with a massive single mesh from the voxelizer. So the effect by this point was looking fairly delicious, so I just needed some corner pieces. I made a few tiles in Goxel using my incredible skills and got them into the game. I actually had to modify the dungeon generator to mark which of the tiles were corner tiles. But it could do with some rotation. This was a bit of a pain and I ended up hardcoding the tiles like a pleb. What didn't help was that they didn't really fit together properly. After a long time of blaming my code, I found that the problem was just that the models were off center slightly. Fantastic. Great, so moving them around a bit, I suddenly had a fully functioning dungeon world. It looks so beautiful. The map works, the dungeon works. It only took like a week. Really, the final remaining piece was to try to get the player to transition from one world to another. This wasn't so bad, although Hey, this is mid-edit Other Mythos, just here to ruin the end of the video for you. I'm talking sort of quietly because the reason I'm here is that it's pretty late. So, getting a video out each week is a bit of a logistical challenge, and I tend to sort of do a few tricks in order to get certain things out in time. So what I will do is I will film the videos like ahead of time, so like, you know, quite a few days before the work has actually been done, and then, you know, edit it at the end of the week. But this week calamity struck and I didn't actually get done all the work that I wanted to get done for this week. The main thing I'm missing, and probably most important, is the actual transition between the two worlds. So the moving over to like some cave in the overworld and being able to arrive in the dungeon. I don't have that yet. So it's quite late right now. I'm calling it. It's going to have to be done next week. Well, when I say next week, I mean this week, because it's currently like 4 o'clock on Monday. The thing is, some weeks are harder than other weeks because, of course, I had a lot of technical debt to deal with this week. And that's okay. That's actually part of the dev cycle, really, that you have to deal with this sort of technical debt. You can't really just brush it under the rug. So to me, including it as part of the week is a good thing. I think you'll need to see kind of the procedure of how difficult some of this stuff can actually be. I didn't really add any interesting gameplay content until like Thursday of this week. So it's still valid work, and I tried to make the video as interesting as possible. Smash like. Oh, and subscribe as well. But what I can't say is that I will absolutely achieve everything every single week. So I'm doing my best, and that's all I can say. What I can say though is thank you for watching. I think I'll hand you back to my previous self. I don't really know what he was going to say, but I think it was something along the lines of, there's only 25 weeks left in the year now, chaps, and I want to have a playable alpha out by the end of the year. Am I insane? Well, you have to keep watching and subscribe to find out.